this.
Mhm.
That I was in, 'cause-
Are we good? I call to order the June 2024 meeting of the Governance and Policy Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone, and our huge audience here at the Twin Cities campus in the boardroom. And I'm sure it's,
Seat people.
tenfold larger online. So our first item of business today is to hear a report of the results of the virtual forum pilot program. I would like to note that this is another of the flipped presentations that we're piloting. The full video presentation can be found in the docket materials. I am absolutely confident that all of my colleagues watched that video prior to today's meeting and are prepared to engage in discussion. I want to extend my thanks to the board staff for taking the time to put that together and get that out to us ahead of time. But presenting this item today is Executive Director Steves and Krista Overby, Communications and Engagement Manager. I understand you have a few remarks to frame our discussion today. So Executive Director Steves, would you like to begin?
Madam Chair, thank you. Ms. Overby and I are here today to report on the virtual forum, to talk about the pilot project and share a preliminary evaluation of its outcomes and effectiveness. We'll just summarize a few highlights. As mentioned, we recorded a video so you could watch that in full, but we'll share a few highlights and use that as a jumping off point for some conversation. As you know, the virtual forum was created to enhance the board's commitment to accountability and transparency. It was added in addition to the array of items that you're seeing on the screen now, things like open meetings, shared governance, correspondence, clear policies, and so forth. The virtual forum was custom built inside the university, drawing from expertise in-house, and it was something that it was a collaborative project between our office and some other offices on campus. And to our knowledge, no other higher education boards have created a tool that is as robust or as transparent as this asynchronous public comment tool that we now have. As you know, comments are linked in the board's public docket so that both you as regents can see what the feedback is from the university community, but also the university community can link through and access those comments and see what the comments are. In that way, it provides this unique, transparent, and accountable kind of public comment feature, which is the thing that we had talked about on the front end, but it also is something now that is reality as we've implemented it. With that brief recap, I'll turn it over to Ms. Overby, who's going to share some of the key takeaways from the project.
Thank you, Mr. Steves. Chair Verhalen, members of the committee. As a reminder of the timeline, today's report is at the end phase of the pilot, and so we will begin evaluating the results. As we considered the forum's effectiveness, we just wanted to ground our review in the guiding principles. The first being effectively supporting the board in building trust and demonstrating accountability. The second being recognizing that public engagement practices evolve over time and require a custom fit to meet the needs of today. And the third being that we're leveraging technology to aid in advancing innovative access and inclusive engagement across the university community. Before analyzing the forum's usage, the board office looked at various data aggregates from the launch of the pilot through the May meeting. A few of the key data points are that there were 952 total virtual forum viewers. Of those viewers, 198 submitted comments. Of those that submitted comments, 196 were written, and 1 was audio and 1 was in the video format. And of those that submitted, 193 were unique users. After conducting the review, which is included in the docket materials and that recorded video presentation that Mr. Steves mentioned, the data is, we broke it down by month, topic, and affiliation, so that won't be repeated here, but we did come away with a few key takeaways. The first being that the use of the forum increased around board meetings and shortly after system-wide promotions of the forum. The second takeaway being that forum usage was higher with external users, for example, alumni and parents, and it was less prominent with internal users, students and faculty, etc. And the third key takeaway was that 75% of individuals that completed those optional questions at the end of the forum said that it was very easy or easy to use, and those that did not say it was easy or very easy to use said that usability on mobile devices, such as scrollability or sizing of the forum, could be improved, and better promotion of the forum could be an area for improvement.
All right, so as I mentioned, that we're going to do a very brief recap, and so today we're here, sharing this information and this data, and sharing some of our initial takeaways. But what we're really interested in is your reactions to it. We would like to know more about how the forum served you as Regents, how you found the usability from the consumer perspective of the forum, the submissions and the forum data. And before we turn to discussion, I just want to note that even though the pilot has run its course, OBR plans to continue to operate the virtual forum and maintain it on the website while the board considers the next steps and decides, what you want to do longer term with regard to the forum or public input. So with that, we're open to questions, or we're also just here to take in feedback.
Yeah. So as people gather their questions, one thing I wanted to highlight, with 198 comments received, and knowing that we were time limiting comments on the forum to 3 minutes or less if they were timed, or a certain number of characters if they were written, that would have been over 10 hours of our time during board meetings if all of those individuals had been able to appear at whatever our public forum time was, to be here and present those thoughts to us. And I think it's, when we think about our overall schedules and how much time we're spending on items during our board meetings, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to absorb this information before our meetings. So I'm not trying to take it all in right before we meet, and really be able to kind of revisit some of these comments as well. I think that that's been really helpful, at least for me, and I really like that there were 193 unique users. Mm-hmm. That means a lot of people are finding different ways to interact with us. And all of these comments, like you said, Executive Director Steves, are available in the public docket unless they contain non-public information that had to be redacted or removed. But I think I appreciate the time and effort, especially by our staff, that went into developing this tool for use so that we could try something new and see where it goes. I'm excited to hear that that we're going to continue to use it and really get some opportunities for additional input that way. I can certainly understand the perspective of, are there other ways we can communicate that it exists, other ways to get the word out, continue to work on usability on mobile devices, and see if there's a way to make that even more accessible. But are there other comments or questions that folks have? Regent Mayron.
So I'm thinking back on the rationale why we did the virtual forum in the first place. And this was, my memory is, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, but there were certain members of our board that were interested in creating time at our board meetings for people to come in and publicly comment, make whatever presentation they wanted to make to the board during the window of time that we created for them. And we had the discussion about fairness, to particularly for those who don't live in the Twin City area, about their ability to access the board in that fashion. I think one of the things that drove the creation of the virtual pilot is to see whether what kind of communications, if we opened this up and particularly offered the ability to do audio and video, which is the closest it could come to appearing here in person and speaking to us. to see how that played itself out. And so, so I look at what we've got here, and I don't know if you all broke it down by campus, which would be interesting to me. And I don't know if the data is available even to do that, to get a sense of how much of this came in from the Twin Cities campus versus our other campuses as well. But it was interesting to me that despite being offered the ability to do a video or an audio, which is the closest to a personal appearance, only 2 people of the 198 took advantage of that process, which, I'm trying to say, and then we need to work through what's the significance of that. But the fact is, very few, 2 people, virtually no one used the ability to appear personally through this means. I thought it was interesting that the comments, the volume of comments go up before a board meeting, and I do understand they go up when we promote it. I don't know if we're promoting it in connection with other events. For example, when we did the presidential search, we told people, you have the ability to communicate to us via the virtual forum as well. I'm thinking the promotions had to do with particular activities that were going on, that we were reminding people this is one way you could communicate with us. But at least as to the board meetings, what I found interesting is that by and large, they're not being used internally, which is what we thought was what we were trying to do, which was give access particularly to students, but others internally to the board. And what we're getting is mostly external communications. And then I'm looking at what the bar charts in that, and I can't remember the percentage, but most of them are not using this feature to comment on the board agenda. So if we're looking for input from people as it relates to what we're going to address on the board agenda, they're not, by and large, using it for that purpose. So those are my observations, and I haven't all put it together. So what's the significance of that, and where does that take me? Is the virtual forum useful or not? It depends. It depends on what the purpose is of why we're using it and what gap we're trying to fill, or additional way of communicating with the board we're trying to fill. And I think that's worthy of more dialogue. To be frank, on the other hand, I much more appreciate reading the virtual forum comments, which are individualized, than I do receiving hundreds, thousands of blast emails that all say the same thing. And so these comments are coming to us in writing, and they're individualized, and I do appreciate that way of communicating how someone is feeling about what it is, whatever it is they want to communicate about, rather than the blast emails. So that's my kind of big picture takeaway on what I'm seeing right now.
Regent Turner?
Okay, so, from my perspective as a bedside care nurse, been working professionally with humankind since I was 12. The one thing that I can say is that the most satisfying way for humans to communicate is verbally, in person, using all of your 5 senses, 6 senses. And that and I've taken care of people from birth all the way till on their deathbed. And when humans aren't able to be heard verbally, in person, they start to act out to get the attention of whoever. You see that with a toddler when you get on the phone and all of a sudden they're bothering you. Or you see that with a person who is laying in a hospital bed at night and wants some attention because they're lonely and they're on the call light all the time. People will, and frankly, in our past year here, we've had various incidences of people acting out or increasing their efforts to be heard. And we've seen it in various forms through this past year. So I'm putting in a plug for the value of, and these statistics, it shows that the parents who maybe don't even live in Minnesota, they used it, et cetera. But the students is who our mission is for. Those are the people that are having the perception that the Board of Regents isn't available, or, and granted, we're I'm told leaps and bounds ahead of every other university, but there's nothing wrong with being a university that has a board that is receptive to listening to the people that we are here for, which is the students. The students obviously, and I get it, we got all these different forms of media, et cetera, but this is not, and this may sound cheesy, but it is not satisfying to the soul, and it does not see to that need to be heard. But I get it. 10 hours, you say, of, as far as, I get it, as far as being available for all the campuses. I would point to the legislature. I would point to all of us during the pandemic, that people that are on Zoom have never felt that they weren't, where you could do a Zoom call. A little bit of the, I would call it a good of the order, where you have people that would sign up for it, they'd get their 2 minutes, and they come, but they're able to do it in person via Zoom, or sitting where Krista is sitting. And that is so invaluable. And that's the world I live in, and these, the numbers, bear out that our students are not getting what they need. And our last board meeting, that was the height of the example of whether it was accurate or not. But when I went out there and I heard the comment, we've been waiting 8 years for this meeting with the Board of Regents. Now, whether that's accurate or not, that was the perception that they had out there, that they hadn't had a chance. They had been wanting to speak to the board for 8 years. Like I said, whether that perception is accurate or not, that is their perception. So I just wish there's a way to do, for sure, continue with this, for sure, market it more, but potentially even quarterly be able to find just various ways, so that we can see to the needs of our students, the way they appear to want to be. And we've had, in my year that we've been here, 2 or 3, 4, maybe 3 times where people have been in the crowd and they stood up and raised their ruckus. Some we were able to hear, some just were here to, raise a ruckus. And I just think if we had an organized way of doing it, every city council does it, the legislature does it, I think that we could potentially have more productive interaction with our student body when they do come to visit us. So that's my say. Thank you.
Regent Wheeler?
Yeah, I think my comments will parallel Chair Mayron's comments, in that I haven't put it all together yet, in terms of which direction to go. And appreciate your candor too, Mary, about what Regent Turner, there we go, about what works best for you. I think that this forum really has helped a lot with people who have barriers, as you suggested, barriers of transportation or timing, and the asynchronous nature of it really offers more. I'm a little bit disappointed that people didn't use a video, because you get so much from the tone, of these things. And I have to say, it took me a while to get a cadence in my preparation where I'd look at all of them, and understand that too. So I've just kind of gotten used to it and gotten that part of the cadence now. So, but I was a little bit disappointed they didn't use that. I was a little disappointed that more students and faculty weren't the ones that were going on, and a little bit disappointed in that a lot of the things that were mentioned didn't necessarily speak to our discernment as a board and what we were considering and deciding. So that was it. That said, I think this forum for those people who have those barriers was a very valuable one, and I got a lot out of the comments that were made. So I like that. harken back to our process of a presidential selection, which I thought was just really wonderful. And we had, input from all the campuses. We could go look at the written comments too. We really had broad participation. It felt like by the faculty and by, not as, maybe we want more students, but by the faculty certainly and many others. And I just wonder if there's I always wonder if there's a both end here, where we could have some, in-person, maybe at the campuses with some kind of open house forums, and that then giving that to us so that people would have more access. And I have, like Regent Turner, seen it work in public meeting sessions. I've been on a few of the governor's task force, and we had, just an open time, 15 minutes at the end. People sign up, and, you hear different things in the tone of what people are bringing than others. Sometimes it's co-opted by certain, issues, but, oftentimes you hear that. So I would say this has been valuable. There's been some, and I think particularly valuable for people who might have barriers to any kind of in-person showing. I'm really grateful for the staff, and what it takes a lot. It takes a lot to set these things up. So grateful for that. I wish there was some way, kind of like the presidential search, to gain more input from the students and faculty, and do so in person.
Yeah, and one second. One of the, and you can slice data a lot of different ways, right? And so you have to be really careful about drawing conclusions from it. But one thing that struck me in looking at that pie chart, that was the virtual forum user affiliation.
Yeah.
And with the alumni and the parents being the larger percentages of that, with students and faculty and staff being a smaller portion. The other thing I think about is, our faculty have the FCC and the Faculty Senate and the UEA. Our students have their student reps here. They have their student government associations at the different campuses that come to us as well. Whereas parents don't, and alumni, I don't think typically think of the alumni association as coming before the board. They think of themselves a little bit differently on an individualized basis. And so I think as we continue our conversations to think about that too, as far as, is it because they don't want to interact with the forum, or is it because they're interacting with their own groups that then come before us in different ways through either our student representatives or through some of the student groups that address us in different subjects related to our board agendas? And so it was just, for me, I don't know, I haven't drawn any final conclusions on any of this, and I'm still, stitching it together and kind of thinking about the next steps, but then also about the question about gathering feedback. And the presidential searches were the visits at the campuses were very targeted, where we are coming to gather information about the presidential search. So people are preparing themselves for that comment and those questions and those topics, versus we're just here to listen to anything you have to say, and what that brings about to, Regent Turner, you mentioned the legislature. There have been more than once when I've attended either in person or virtually a public comment period, and unfortunately the legislature goes long and everyone in the room is told, please leave your comments, we'll read them. And that has a different side of it too. Or we only have time to take a couple comments, we're out of time. And so thinking through how do we structure it into our schedule to gather that feedback without making anyone feel like they took the time out of their schedule to be here and then we weren't able to make time for them. Just some random musings as I listened to the presentation and went to that, and then Regent Wheeler and then Regent Johnson.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point. And the circle slide that you just showed, showing all the different ways in which people can, express things is wise. So I think that's a really good point. I wonder if there may be, just as we do with the budget, some more targeted issues that we ask for feedback on, rather than just, throwing it all open to, that might be another thing that we think about, either virtually or otherwise.
Yeah. Regent Johnson.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to share a few comments from my experience with the Presidential Search
Yeah.
Advisory Committee last year. So early on, one of the first things we did as a group was to establish listening sessions on all the campuses. So I was at the one in Minneapolis, one at St. Paul, and the one in Rochester. There were relatively few students there, although some can't remember, particularly at St. Paul, a couple leaders were there and they had some really good comments. In Rochester, almost none, and it was just said, students usually don't come to these kind of forums. So, I think that was some information learned from that. We did, let's see, so as thinking through this as a group, Mary Davenport and James Farnsworth, who are the other two regents on Presidential Search Advisory Committee, decided to have a session in the students in Kaufman, right? Yeah, set up a table, we're there, and I think those are the kind of ideas that might work. That it's a particular issue. If there's any, they were there to kind of meet and greet, and people could come by and give comments. And I think those are kind of useful considerations to do. I think it was about a year ago, I don't remember exactly, we did have, as one of our kind of pilot things, we had a session here. It was at the time that we were going to approve the budget, and we had invited people to come and have a kind of, we had an open forum.
Yeah, we did that last month.
What?
We did that last month.
Well, I wasn't here last month, but I mean last
It's
year.
done yearly, it's part of the.
Yeah, right, but I was talking about last year because but I was really disappointed that, I don't know if you remember, but almost nobody who was here addressed the budget issue at all in the audience. It was almost all from one group, and they were angry and they shouted slogans when they came up, and that was it. So I thought that was an incredibly disappointing session. Maybe it would be different with something else, but anyway, that was just an experience we had, and I think we're looking at different options, which I think is useful, and maybe going to where people are, if there are things that come up that have to do with certain specific issues that might be important to engage students, that we look at who might be most affected on which campuses or whatever, maybe hold a forum there or a table where we sit around and have people informally come and talk to us about things that might work. So I think we have to keep trying different options. But
yeah, and this certainly isn't the end of the conversation, right? Because we'll be going forward from here. Executive Director Steves.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, just a couple observations based on what I'm hearing as well. One of the things when we talk with staff at other boards across the country, and the ways that they're getting input or receiving input, one of the things that we hear are some themes that we also experience, and I think all of you experience, which is no matter what form you're getting input, whether it's in person, via email, other ways, all the channels, it really falls into a few categories. And one of the categories are things unrelated to the board's work. You receive a lot of input that isn't related to anything that the board would engage in. Lots and lots and lots. Many of those kinds of communications are things we receive in the board office. We intercept and we redirect to the right office because they're simply misdirected. And you also receive a number, in many cases, a large number of communications where they are asking you to intervene and act as an appellate body, basically, to overrule some decision that's been made. And that's usually a decision of one of your shared governance partners. It's either the tenured faculty, like someone doesn't like something that a faculty member decided, or they don't like some way that a faculty member operated, or it is some administrative decision. And so they're asking you to overrule or intervene or basically adjudicate the situation, which occasionally the board does, but it needs to be rare because otherwise you will do that full time, frankly. I mean, if you took up all of the items, you will spend all of your time doing that. And then there's a small subset that is also that you receive that is actually directly related to the items before you or the priorities that you've established. It tends to be, at least from our observation, that most of the input you receive is not related to the things that you say are your priorities to advance the institution. very little of it. And that's the thing you have to keep grappling with as regents, is how much time and energy and effort you want to devote to items that you say collectively are not your priority. Because that's the push-pull. And you have to obviously be responsive and be listening and all of that, but you have to also just weigh it in terms of the amount of volunteer time, energy, and effort you have as a board. We actually have been thinking as well as a staff, and we plan to at the retreat share with you some engagement ideas and a more. We're contemplating. Krista's going to be developing a lot of this, but we're building out a more robust and thoughtful engagement plan, a more coordinated plan to think about your engagement across your term. And so one of the things that we are intrigued by are some of the things, Ruth, Regent Johnson, you were talking about with regard to the presidential search, because some of the things we learned from the listening sessions there and the formats used, you talked about the pop-up in Kaufman Union. We got more comments by setting up a table in Kaufman from students than we did in any of the formal listening sessions. And so we think there could be some ways to maybe not replicate what a city council does, but maybe come at this from a meet people where they are standpoint, and get input in that way. And so we think there's maybe some innovative ways to come at this, and we're excited about that. I would also just note, for instance, that some of the organizations within the university have come at it differently as well. The undergraduate student government for a number of years has run a student shadowing program where they invite you as regents to shadow for a half day or a full day one of the students that they've identified, and you kind of walk through their class schedule with them. That's a wonderful opportunity to really get immersed in what does the student experience look like. And so we always encourage regents to do that. We think it's a really good opportunity, and there are many others like that that offer regents a way to really touch the people of the university community. So all of that to say, we do intend to offer up some ideas, some opportunities that maybe you will find intriguing in the coming months.
Yep, one last thought, and then we have to move on.
I'm encouraged by what you say. Do I have to call you Mr. Steve?
Executive Director.
Executive Director Steve.
Senior.
Regent Turner, whatever you'd like to call me.
No, I'm encouraged by what you say, because you say that, when you talk about our priorities and all that, and we do have to, especially when we're in this setting, we have to stay focused on that. Otherwise, we're not going to have any time. But I will point out that part of our responsibility as a board is we are the representatives, and we are like you always say, we're the top of the heap as far as the university ecosystem. And we, so people see us, that's why we're the ones who are always blamed when things go wrong, And so we're the ones that people are going to feel the most satisfied when they're able to have some interaction. I mean, when I went to go visit this undergraduate student council thing, that whole room was just thrilled that I was there in front of them, asking them questions. They were responding back and forth. And that little time out of my life to go visit them had a huge impact on how those students potentially maybe viewed the board. Because it's like, or what you were talking about, setting up the table. I think definitely I'm intrigued by the idea of going to where they are. And it doesn't have to be all of us. Some of us regents will have time to do that or want to do that more than others. But it should definitely be options for the people because when I was president of M&A, there was nothing more satisfying than to be able to go visit nurses in their break rooms, I'm saying break rooms, Penny, because I remember you were going to see it. But going to visit them where they were, and seeing them in their environment and talking to them at their meetings and things like that. There is nothing more valuable to the nurses. And I would say the same thing for our students.
Yeah, just one quick comment. So are we kind of seeing that students are kind of a group, because we're a lot of talk about students, are they the primary group? I mean, we know everybody has their own, like the faculty, the staff, and the students have their own government things, but or do the faculty, seems like maybe faculty, staff have official, ways of communicating, directing with us and presenting and coming back forth. Maybe that works. Do we think students are a group that really is different? I'm just asking, that needs more interaction like this.
I think that will be part of our ongoing conversations. And, part of what we'll discuss at the retreat, what we'll discuss next year, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
I was just going to, and I know we need to move on to our really fun part of the on the policy
Do a
piece
song
of-
and dance or what?
But what I'm hearing is, and as we think about our discussion at the retreat, it seems to me, that's why I said I'm citing some things that stood out to me, but I haven't figured out the significance in which way it directs me. But I'm hearing, on the one hand, there's engagement, and that has a different flavor to it than simply, I shouldn't say simply, than creating a forum to hear. Not engage, but to hear. And along what Mary was talking about, just the act of hearing is something we need to offer up in person, from Mary's point of view. And we have a variety of ways right now of hearing what people are unhappy about. And I think you all saw that play itself out with the gymnastics piece of it, of me taking the position. We've heard you. We've heard you, and not only we've heard you, we've examined all of your options and tried to see if there's a different way to go. And so that made the decision that we made, or that I made. But engagement is different. And so, and maybe what it is at the end of, not that we are going to cut off the ability for people to share their viewpoints and for us to hear them. But if engagement is another or primary goal, then maybe we're going to look at different solutions, whether it's the pop-up table or visits to campus, or that we think that would be more fruitful, where you can have dialogue and give and take, as opposed to a 3-minute presentation or an email that lays out one person's point of view and no dialogue follows that. Just a thought as we explore options and talk about this with the entire group at the retreat.
Good.
You can tell we're all excited to talk about this some more.
Profound.
Now the fun part.
Thank you, Krista. So our second, thank you, Ms. Overby and Executive Director Steves. Appreciate the summary, and we look forward to continued discussions. Our second item is the University Policy Overview. Joining us for this item are Associate Secretary Jason Langworthy, Seth Beckard, Policy Program Director and Compliance Officer with the Office of Institutional Compliance, and Maggie Marcassani, Committee and Policy Coordinator with the Office of the Board of Regents. Associate Secretary Langworthy, would you like to start us off on this topic?
Chair Verhalen, members of the committee, Regent Maron, it's not just fun, it's extra fun policy today, because typically when I come to talk to you, it's about board policy, but today we get to look at the entire spectrum of the university policy framework and hear more about administrative policy in addition to board policy. So it's extra fun.
This is your Super Bowl.
This is the Super Bowl. This is the national championship.
That's great.
Everything rolled
Big,
into one.
big.
Yep. Yep.
Pom-poms?
Brian does.
Brian does.
Executive Director Steves.
So, and any good policy presentation always starts with key policies. And the key policies that we're talking about today are Board of Regents policy, board policy development, and administrative policy, establishing administrative policies. These are the policy on policies, so to speak, and create the framework for the policy structure that we operate within. So we'll be highlighting those throughout. First, let's start with the university policy framework hierarchy. And this hierarchy, as you can see, we'll take a few minutes to walk through it. So at the very top is the university's charter. When the university was established by act of the territorial legislature in 1851, that legislation is what we call the University of Minnesota Charter. And the charter did things like establish the university. It vested the governance of the university into a board of 12 regents. It defined how regents are elected, which is through a joint convention of the Minnesota legislature, and how vacancies are filled. It allowed for you to do things as a board, like hire a faculty, hire a president, have officers, and related to mission fulfillment, yesterday in the charter is the notation to hire a university librarian, which is why you continue to reserve appointment of the librarian today, because it's actually in the charter, and that was something that was very specifically called out, which is fun. As the charter then was perpetuated by the Minnesota Constitution when the state entered the Union. From there, the next level are your bylaws, and the board bylaws really have to do with how you do business as a board and how you function as a board. So it defines officers, including in the charter what was called the chancellor, which is now the president of the university, is an ex officio member of the board. The other officers, so the board chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer, how those are elected. Your agenda, so the Friday morning agenda that that you'll take up here in a little bit, that is defined by bylaws, and other provisions broadly, and some broad delegations to the president and to the faculty for creating the university and moving the university forward in that mission. The next two levels are our two system level policies, and we'll get into those more here in a second, but those are at board and administrative structures. So I'll skip those for now and move to then the next three, which are campus, college, and department. So this is really where we're getting into how are we taking board administrative, which are creating broad system-wide provisions, and then how are those being implemented, right? And that depends. That depends on the setting that you're in, the campus, the college, the department. Some of the campus policies that work well for the Crookston campus might not be applicable to the Rochester campus. So this is where they are, sort of defining specifically what is needed to implement or what is needed to provide for policy guidance in those settings. The other item I'll mention is the governmental, which we have sort of to the left there of the triangle. So the governmental are governmental regulations, so either federal or state, that impact how your policies take place, what is needed within there. So a couple of examples, things like the open meeting law impact your bylaws, impact your notice requirements, impact how you do your business. Federal regulations around sponsored funding and grants. There are a number of administrative policies that implement or provide guidance in those areas, because when we work with the federal government, they require specific things, and the administration needs to make those clear to those in the university community that are carrying out those grants. The final thing I'll highlight on this slide is the pyramid. So as you sort of move down, you get very specific in terms of operational pieces. As you go higher, it's often a bit more broad, and then each level needs to be in compliance with the level above it. So departmental policies need to be in compliance with campus policies. Board policy needs to be in compliance with the charter. And if there is ever a conflict, it is the level above that controls. So if there's ever a conflict between administrative and board policy controls. So as we turn now to those two sections that we'll highlight in more detail today, board policies and administrative policies, they are both system-wide classifications, so they cover the entire system. Board policy covers the entire system. On the administrative side, there are some administrative policies that cover a specific subset of campuses, but the vast majority are system-wide policies. And they follow a similar revision process and consultation model, which we'll take some time to talk about. And the language is really aimed for use by the broader university community. When we look at board and administrative policies, we want anyone within the university community to be able to read and understand and engage with the policies. And that's actually a provision in Board of Regents policy, board policy development, that those are written in that way. You don't need to be a huge policy nerd that wears bow ties to be able to understand our policy system. So that's always helpful. So now with your permission, Chair Verhalen, I'll turn it over to Coordinator Marquezani to talk about board policy.
Chair Verhalen, members of the committee, good morning. As of yesterday, we now have 87 board policies, which are broken into 6 categories for organization: academic, administrative, board operations, delegation of authority, financial, and human resources. The board speaks through its policies, and they give you the ability to set the framework in which the university is to carry out its mission, and they define the fundamental principles as a basis for future action by the president and their administration. They generally deal with the university as a whole. You can think of the board policies as the broad umbrella policies, which are setting the direction for the university. In certain areas, board policies do provide more detailed procedures when those procedural steps bring clarity, or in areas where the board wants to give very specific guidance for the administration to follow. The process for considering a building renaming is a good recent example of that. Otherwise, procedures for managing the university in compliance with board policy are developed and refined administratively. Board policies also define what decisions are reserved to the board and what authority is delegated to the president. Having clearly defined reserved and delegated authority helps to create alignment between the board and the president, and ensures that everyone understands what their responsibilities are and what areas the board has specific interest in, either to mitigate risk because of the significance of the decision being made, or if the area is fundamental to the board's governance role. This committee recently discussed the board's reserved authority at length and updated those thresholds this spring. Finally, board policies are meant to be more enduring rather than in response to a particular issue. This is because of the impact that any change in a board policy has. As Associate Secretary Langworthy described, a change in board policy has a rippling effect down through the rest of the policy framework hierarchy. As a result, board policies are reviewed and amended less frequently in comparison to administrative policies. And now Director Burkhardt will outline the administrative policies for you.
Thanks, Chair Verhalen, members of the committee. So we have around 200 policies at any given time. That's stayed more or less consistent for the last 15 years. As of today, we have 197, but we have 5 new policies actually up for vote next week. So if you want to talk about Super Bowl, it's like a week worth of Super Bowls here on the policy. There's 3 main reasons we have administrative policies. One, most obvious, is because the board says so. Like Secretary Langworthy said, to keep in alignment with the level above you, if the board says we need an administrative policy, we need an administrative policy. Second is to achieve compliance with laws, rules, and regulations. We'll see this pretty commonly, like in research funding. A colleague in my Office of Institutional Compliance owns the conflict of interest policy, for example, and we have to have that in place because Public Health Service says we need a conflict of interest policy in place to receive funding. And then finally, it's to address a risk to the institution that can't be adequately addressed elsewhere. One of our recent policies about 2 years ago, for the first time, we had a system-wide occupational health and safety policy. And obviously, because of OSHA regulations, we were complying with it just in different areas, but we were worried that there might be a risk of differing levels of compliance if we didn't have a centralized policy that had an owner. So we created that policy for the first time. With all of our policies, we're looking to promote operational efficiency and effectiveness. We're not looking to add burden. We're looking to reduce it. Again, the OSHA is a perfect example. There wasn't, we had the duty to comply, but the policy was put in place to give people at the university the resources to comply with OSHA within their department. In addition to the policies, we have associated documents, we have procedures, the how we implement the policy. We have appendices and FAQs for the more niche situations that don't need to be in the policy, that it's interpretation in unique instances. And then we also host on our website forms, forms needed to comply with the policy. Unlike the board policies, we do amend them pretty frequently, just because they're used every day by the people at the university that it applies to. So the biggest aspect of my job is really helping keep policies current. What we don't want is to, have a policy that we wrote 15 years ago and it became stale and just lingered out, didn't we're not following it or it doesn't apply to the current situation. So every 4 years, unless there's an exception granted to 6 years, so every 4 to 6 years, policy owners undertake a comprehensive review of that policy. The first question that we ask them is, does the content of the policy still align with the strategic direction and mission of the university? We also ask them, do we still need the policy? Again, trying to reduce burden, make things more clear for the users of the policy at the university. At that meeting next week, one of the policies that is coming up is we have a policy for using the university procurement card and a policy for using the travel card, and just to condense it, make it easier for users, we're condensing them into one policy. And then the biggest one, since usually we still need the policy, and hopefully the policy still aligns with the strategic direction and mission of the university, what we're trying to do is make sure it reflects current practice. It's just an opportunity for policy owners, systems change, processes change, but to look at their policy to make sure that it still reflects what's going on, or if they can also use it as a leaping off point to tighten up their own practices. Unlike board policy, it's pretty rare for a comprehensive review to take place and not have at least some changes to clarification, just because, it's ours, the administrative policies and documents are so lengthy that there's pretty much always going to be an opportunity to tighten things up. So I'll turn it back over to Associate Marcheski.
So as far as frequency goes, on the board side, policies are comprehensively reviewed every 6 years. That was codified in board policy development in 2017. The 87 policies are broken into roughly 6 classes, or 6 classes of roughly 14 policies that are up for comprehensive review each year. This helps balance workload across the board's committees and policy implementers. We are currently finishing the second class of policies, and class 3 will be up for review next academic year. All right, so so now we're going to talk broadly through the policy review cycle. The cycle displayed here is true of comprehensive review and off-cycle amendments. However, technical corrections don't follow this process, which Associate Secretary Langworthy will speak to next. So if we start at the top of the policy review cycle, we first define the policies for review. We would then notify the board policy implementer, who are the senior leaders who are responsible for the policy. The second step is for the implementer to perform a review. They would be answering the questions that Director Burkert outlined for you. They would also be taking time to talk with impacted groups and engaged departments or stakeholders who are significantly influenced by the policies. In addition, they would be considering if there have been any notes or points of friction that perhaps didn't need an off-cycle amendment, but now that the policy is open and up for comprehensive review, a change is warranted. Given that board policies are meant to be more enduring and broad, it's not unusual for a policy to not need changes. And if that's the case, the policy would come before the appropriate committee as an information item informing the board that the comprehensive review has been completed with no recommended changes. If the policy review is completed in June, it would come via the annual board policy report. On the other hand, if the policy implementer does recommend substantive changes, they would create a draft, which would first go through internal reviews in which the board office would make sure that the proposed amendments align with policy conventions. So then moving to the bottom bubble, the next step would be to consult with shared governance. The policy implementer would discuss with the key groups that they engaged during the initial review, and they would also complete a formal consultation within the university senate if required, where the policy would be routed through the various senate committees to ensure that shared governance also has a chance to review the policy. And then after completion of consultation, the policy would come to the board for review and action. Approval for any change to any board policy is reserved to the board because they are ultimately your policies. Board policies are typically reviewed at one meeting, and then action is taken at the next meeting, much like any action item that allows for the public and members of the university community to weigh in and provide comments. We try to have a policy come back at the subsequent meeting, but if there's more work needed, or if the board raises questions, or if there's significant feedback that comes from the university community, it can prolong the process and delay action by the board until a later meeting. The policy review cycle can't take as long as it needs, as long as there is progress being made. And then finally, once it's approved by the board, the policy is implemented. So I'll now turn it back over to Director Bricker to highlight the differences in the administrative policy review cycle.
Yeah, so we have a pretty similar process, although some of the parts, particularly consultation, get a little bit longer with administrative policy comprehensive reviews. To start, I'll send out a 6-month due date kickoff reminder, meet with the policy owner and kind of describe the process to them. From there, the owners are responsible for drafts, making changes to the policy. At that point, we ask them, the people that are implementing the policy to work with those groups to make sure the policy still reflects current practice. Any key people that use it very frequently, we ask that they reach out to them and get their feedback. Once they have that draft written up, we have several groups that the policy owners have to consult with. Every policy has to go to an equity lens committee for equity lens review. Most of our policies, about 80% of them, have to go to at least one Senate committee or Senate subcommittee, and the Senate periodically reviews that all of our policies and make sure it's going to the right committees. We also, if there's key groups in the areas for like our research areas, those policies all go through the Council of Research Associate Deans. The provost policies that apply to students, they developed like an online portal and they send it out for public feedback just because a lot of their policies affect all students. And then from there, it's sent to me, and the committee I head up is the Policy Advisory Committee. Each vice president at the university has a delegate on that committee, and each of the non-Twin Cities campuses also has a person on that committee. And that group is really just sort of the policy experts throughout the university that tighten up the policy. Secretary Langworthy also sits on that and helps us make sure that there's nothing coming up that is would put us out of alignment with the board policies. If the changes to the comprehensive review are minor, that's the final step. They'll incorporate those last changes from the Policy Advisory Committee and we can publish the policy. For any new policies, retired policies, or policies that have a significant change, it goes one additional step to the President's Policy Committee. And that's the group that pretty much all the vice presidents that report directly to the president, they're the ones that finally vote on those new and retired and significantly changed policies. For those policies also, once they're approved, they are pending for 30 days. We have a public comment period that we have an email list that we send out, and some policies don't get that much interest. Other policies we get a lot of comments. So it just kind of depends on the topic and the interest that the public has. And then once the policy owners consider any public feedback, at that point we'll finalize the policy and it'll get added to the policy library. Two quick other types of review that we wanted to highlight. First is off-cycle change. A lot of times this will come up in new regulations, for example, the Title IX regulations that are going into effect in August. That policy is coming to the Policy Advisory Committee later this month for those changes. It wasn't due for a comprehensive review yet, but because of the time sensitivity of the new regulations, that's coming up. And then technical changes, basically anything that isn't a requirement, new policy contacts, new FAQs, they can be added any time. We get about 100 or so of those a month into our office that we make those changes. So I'll turn it back over to Secretary Langworthy.
So with that, Chair Verhalen, I'll just note, certainly off-cycle changes, you see those come up as well with board policy. And the technical changes, the difference there is that board policy allows the board chair to make technical corrections, and we typically use that when there is a change of administrative title or a change to a policy name. Yesterday in Finance and Operations, because there were other things that needed to change, there were a couple of technical corrections that we also made at that point that we just routed through the consent report. And so with that, I'll just highlight, in the interest of time, the the 2024 Board Policy Report, and that policy report is an annual required report that just summarizes the policy work that the board and the Office of the Board of Regents has undertaken over the past year. And so the first part of the report reports those results. So there were 6 policies comprehensively reviewed with no revisions recommended. 4 policies were amended in the report, and then as of yesterday, 5 policies were amended and 1 repealed. So that's always fun when we can look for opportunities to combine board policies to help simplify the overall policy library. We have 8 policies that are currently under sort of revision, under drafting, that we anticipate to come either this summer for those that will be impacted by the new Title IX regulations or early next fall. And then 10 policies still under review or held over, and those will be held over for next year. And that's not uncommon. Comprehensive reviews, as you've just heard, is a complex process that requires a lot of shared governance, a lot of work. And there are times when it just takes longer for those to be completed, or we have transitions in the administration, and then there's a desire to hit pause for a little bit until new leadership comes into place. Much like in internal audit finding, as long as progress is being made, that's great. If there is no progress being made, we will certainly let you know if there is something where something has stalled out. And then for 24-25, for the work plan, that's the second part of the report, that outlines the 14 board policies that are up for comp review, and then carries forward those that are being, that we anticipate imminent amendments, and those that are still under review by policy implementers. And so with that, Chair Verhalen, we're happy to take any questions that the committee might have.
Thanks, Chair Mayor, and I'll recognize you in just one second.
Sure.
But just wanted to thank the team for all their work, because I know that these are not, the headline exciting topics necessarily to work on, but they are so critically important to the orderly function of the university. And to your point of consolidation of policies where it actually makes sense and allows for a more not only streamlined operation, but understandable operation of administrative functions is very much appreciated. So, Regent Mayron.
Just a quick question. In the presentation, when you were talking about the administrative policies, you said that they go through an equity lens review. I'm curious about the board policies, whether there is a similar mechanism in place or any discussion about adding that to our the criteria or that we would use to evaluate any board policy or contemplate any change to a board policy.
Associate Secretary Langworthy.
Chair Verhalen, Regent Mayron, so while it is not sort of a more formalized step in the way that it is for administrative policy, the same administrative staff that are undertaking administrative review are the same ones that are undertaking board review. And we encourage them to think about the equity lens review when they are looking at amendments to the board policy. I'll also note that that group is a volunteer group, and because of the impact and frankly, the volume of administrative policies, that's where that focus has been as compared to the board policy. But when there are board policies, especially something like the Student Conduct Code, for example, right, that is very detailed, that has a direct impact, we encourage the policy implementer at that point to use that equity lens and to think about it in that way.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion?
Yes, they're done.
There being no further discussion or business before the committee, we will adjourn. The board will reconvene for its annual meeting in 15 minutes.